privilege it is to be here with all of you in Cape Town, a space that is marked by mountains, wind, and water. And we've heard a lot about the oceans today, and I'm not surprised because we're in a place where 3 oceans meet land. You've got the warm Indian Ocean to the east, the wild Atlantic to the west, and the deep Southern Ocean quietly, productively operating as one of the biggest climate buffers that we know of. Just about an hour up the coast, up the west coast, you've got a bay called Langebaan. But actually, it's part of a system that's a West Coast National Park on the one side and Saldanha Bay on the other. But we speak about these places as if they are separate. But if you've been there, then you know that they are all part of the same system. And what happens in one part of the bay shows up at every part of this system. And that holds attention. Over here, you can see the beautiful West Coast National Park, recognized internationally for the important biodiversity it holds and the ecosystem services that it is providing. And then we move to the other side of the bay, Saldanha, which is South Africa's biggest deep water port, currently exporting over 60 million tons of iron ore each year. Protected, productive, fragile, industrial. Same bay, same system, different choices. Recently, I spent a day in Langebaan with a group of small-scale fishers. Many of them were 5th generation, which meant that their families have lived and worked on these waters for over a century. And when we were talking to them, they weren't speaking about this bay with nostalgia. They were speaking about it very currently, about access, about how recent policy changes have changed that access and the impact that that's not only having on their jobs, but on their culture and their identity. They also spoke about water, how the quality of the water had over time slowly changed the fish stock, and in a way that you wouldn't notice overnight, but you would if you depended on that water for your livelihoods. That conversation made something very clear to me. This wasn't just an environmental problem. This was a system design problem. Just last week, small-scale fishers like Mark over here were told that nationally, 565 boats and vessels were allowed to do traditional line fishing a year, and that got slashed to 77. In a letter that they sent to the government, they said, this is not just our job, this is our identity and our culture. And so we have to look at the governance systems and see how do they work across a system. So what's my connection to this bay? I've started learning how to kite surf, and this is where I was doing it. My father was here almost 60 years ago, based in the Navy, and later returned as an engineer, building a lot of the port infrastructure for natural gas. Same concrete that you can find there today, same port, but the system is changing. And what's changing from it is not what the future then was fossil fuels and very necessary at the time and strategic. The question now is being asked of it is a future industrial hub that is green. And what that looks like is innovation hubs, hydrogen production, desalination plants turning seawater into fresh water. It's the same place and the same system, but different choices being made with it. And so that is the shift that sits at the heart of how I think about climate responsibility. Many of us here in this room care deeply about climate solutions. We build them, we fund them, and we scale them. What I've learned from working in real physical places like this bay is that sometimes we design these solutions in isolation, but then drop them into a living system where how it lands is very different in context. When systems like this are deeply interconnected, it's really important that we look at each of the different aspects of that system, because climate change doesn't form into neat boxes. Jobs over here, industry over there, energy over there. Bays like this are living examples of what happens at the interfaces, where industry meets nature, where policy meets people, and where what happens in a port can impact the quality of the water. And working bays like this are being asked to do a lot: support industry, create jobs, protect the ecosystems, all at once. And that complexity can feel completely overwhelming. But it's also an opportunity to see how we can design better for a system, especially if we start recognizing the ocean is something that's already doing a lot of work for us. Going back to that Southern Ocean, it is currently doing a disproportionate amount of sucking up over 30% of carbon dioxide that we have, as humans, collectively emitted into the atmosphere. And a lot of other things like heat that's being buffered through the oceans across the world. But that buffering does come at a cost. As carbon dioxide dissolves into seawater, it changes the chemistry and it becomes more acidic. And we're starting to see the impacts on that on marine life, even here. But we've got some awesome scientists, policymakers, and innovators and communities saying, what can we do about it? And so now I'm going to talk about marine carbon dioxide removal. At its simplest, this is looking at how we can enhance natural systems that are already occurring to do so in even more. That can mean enhancing natural biological processes, such as cultivating seaweed at scale, like kelp blue in Namibia. Or it could mean carefully designed experiments, such as ocean alkalinity enhancement or direct ocean capture. For example, in the UK, the University of Exeter is leading a project called SeaCure, where they are taking seawater, running electricity through it, separating it into an acid and base, taking out the carbon dioxide, remixing that water, and putting that decarbonized water back into the ocean, which is therefore increasing the alkalinity and therefore the ocean's ability to take up more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Seems like a lot, but there are people all around the world doing a lot of this, and just here in South Africa, some amazing science that's been happening, and I'll come to that in a second. But what I find really interesting when we think about these systems is looking at where we can make them work together, because actually these systems like port infrastructure or desalination can make it much more efficient to do in tandem. For instance, if we go back to that acid and base example, you're seeing some innovations in California where they're repurposing that acid to be used in mining processes or tagging into wastewater treatment works. So there are potentials for the ecosystem and the industry to work well together. In South Africa and across the Southern Ocean, scientists have been doing decades of work monitoring how heat, carbon, and nutrients are moving through the layers of the ocean. And now they're mapping that along the coastline of South Africa through a program called Sirocco, which you can find out more about on the QR code. But the work that they're doing, which is super important, is providing the evidence to show what's changing, where parts of the ocean are really under threat, and where we might be able to create places that you can enhance its ability to keep doing more. And that brings it back to place. In a place like Saldanha Bay, where you have infrastructure, industry, energy systems, ecosystems, and communities already under strain, instead of building these solutions in a way that's disconnected, you can ask a more grounded question. What would it look like if we were to design these systems in a way that reduces carbon and helps the ecosystems with the industry and communities in a working bay? And that is some of the work that we are doing at SAILOR, which is the South African Innovation Lab for Ocean Climate Resilience, where we are guiding ocean climate futures in a way that's rooted in science, being built with coastal communities and engaging different stakeholders from the innovators to the policymakers as well. And a key part of that is focusing on something from measurement, reporting, and verification of what's happening on a carbon level, is also looking at how can we design the systems from the start to create meaningful jobs for the stakeholders who are in those places most impacted by it. Because if the science doesn't hold up, it's not going to get off the ground to start with. But if it excludes communities, it's not going to scale either. if we ignore industrial realities, is not going to even start. And there's one final constraint that I haven't mentioned yet, and that's capital. The typical capital that would be backing new innovations is venture capital, and that's been designed for software companies and companies that can scale on fast time horizons. But if you come to a place where you're building ports or working with living ecosystems, those solutions aren't going to happen in a rush. But if you look at the capital pools that have the patience to back these types of systems, they don't typically have the risk tolerance if you look at banks who lend or pension funds. And so we get stuck in this missing middle where the risk-taking venture capital doesn't want to put into these long physical infrastructure time horizons, but then the more pension fund debt providers also can't take that uncertainty. So there's this opportunity in the middle to bring a different type of capital together where you do have philanthropists or grant givers who can take the initial risk on proving some of the science and seeing if it could work in a physical place. You've got the equity providers who can absorb some of that uncertainty that's not yet proven until you've got teams on the ground actually building it. And then you've got, particularly in Africa, we've got so much debt. So we need to see how we bring these different types of capital together to actually be part of the system from the beginning, because we all see that shared value and we all want to value it. And if we can do this well in one bay like Saldanha, Langebaan, and the West Coast National Park, it doesn't stay local. It becomes a model that we can scale across the country and the continent. And so when I go back to Saldanha Bay now, I don't just see a port or a protected area, I see a living question. Is there an opportunity for us to rebuild with the same tools that we might have used for the industrial era, but rebuilding with responsibility front of mind? And I'd like to take a second to thank our wonderful organizers for creating this platform for us to be here, and TEDx for creating this amazing initiative, which is sharing these wonderful ideas worth sharing. And I have to mention the multitude of journalists and stakeholders in this bay who have surfaced this important work. It's such an honor to be here with all these amazing people, and I look forward to being part of this responsible future together.